Wonderful. Awesome. So we'll invite Brian in, and we've got some questions here. And I think while I bring him in, um, let's see here. Yeah, I want to just reference the significance of the dreams in your story. I think that there's something to that. You know, my dad's work is really about bringing these living symbols from the natural world into relationship with the dream world,
Mhm.
and doing that through having an active imagination where these processes can start to live in us as a practice. When we go to sleep, he calls it ABC CBA, where you take whatever challenge you're working with, whatever picture, and you bring it into a movie that goes forwards and then a movie that goes backwards until you can kind of bring that fluidity. But then on the last taking it backwards, you let it go into the dream world and fall asleep. He says the dream world, or the spiritual world, understands things through picture and that reversal. And that then the next day or sometime later, some picture will come to you. Either somebody will say something or some serendipitous movement will happen, and you have this answer. And that's how you know it's come back to you from that spiritual reality. Is they could never have known that you were pondering this question or whatever. So I was wondering if maybe the two of you could share just a little bit about the dream life that you have and how much that's affected your relationship with the natural world and this world of alchemy. Maybe we'll start with Courtney since you were on a roll there.
Yeah, totally. Well, of course, like there was my introduction to the bees and, it being near death experiences, bringing that has its own power, but that dreams really did introduce me to them in a lot of ways, or at least this like spiritual understanding. And for me, the more I've been able to, fine tune this faculty, and is that this idea of communicating with animals and plants through our dreams and creating that intention, to like I've had dreams about my hives. I remember dreaming about one of my hives. I was like, it came to me in my dreams that it got attacked by a bear. This was in the middle of winter and my hive's like hours away, and I was like, I woke up the next morning, I was like, I need to go check on this hive. And sure enough, I went there and the hive was like tipped over, and if I didn't get there in time, that hive wouldn't have made it. And that's been a common thread throughout my journey, is the hive communicating to me through my dreams, and but also being shown this kind of like deeper spiritual relationship. And so I'm really fascinated with the Melissae. I didn't talk about them, but they existed in ancient Greece and pre-ancient Greece, and they were known as bee women or bee priestesses. And these were the women that served at Eleusis and Delphi and some of the biggest temples in ancient Greece. And they were doing a lot with dream work, and they were doing a lot of oracular work. And so that is communing with spirit in the other world. And the dreams, the bees, is kind of being this, because they live in darkness, because they birth creation from darkness, they're very much like associated with, yeah, just like liminal spaces. And yeah, but like I would say for me that it's really shown up is just like being really powerful, like messages, not only, the hive communicating to me when it's in distress. And that's been a common thread with like other animals, and plants. Just I've dreamt about, they can come through us through our dreams. But also like, yeah, like when I was starting to think about tree hives, I started to dream about bees and trees constantly. And so it's just like, I feel like they come through and they can just kind of help affirm my path with the bees. And so creating a relationship with my dreams has been one of the most important parts of bee tending, and understanding the myriad of ways that I can be communicating with these beings and how they communicate to us, right? And so like I feel like they communicate to us through our dreams and other faculties, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah. So, yep. Same thing. Just not bees. No, that's
Yeah.
the thing. It's like whatever you're focusing on, whatever you're working on, whatever you're doing is what you start to dream about, right? And
Yeah.
then it's where you that's what I was saying in the talk. It's like in two directions. One, you really have a question, a problem. I mean, in the Greeks, they refer to this as a dream incubation. This is the basis of actually our medicine now. I mean, going back to Hippocrates, what they would do is if someone had a problem, an illness, what have you, they'd go to a temple, pray to the god, do whatever ritual, spend the night in the temple, have a dream, and either the dreamer would be revealed or the priest would interpret it. Right. Then they would write it on the wall as to what the cure was. And what Hippocrates did was go through the temples and collected them all and started developing an idea of medicine. But it's that dream incubation. And sometimes it happens unintentionally, unconsciously, but when you intend to do it is where you start to see results. I mean, unintentionally, it's just kind of like whatever you're working on. I mean, we've all had this, right? Where something will just, an answer will sort of pop up in the dream, or even just as you're walking around daydreaming, right? Yeah. So that's the thing. And you find this in alchemical texts, right? I mean, Zosimos, there's a 4th century or so, 3rd century, in a dialogue with his alchemical sister. And he's expressing or dialogue about, an alchemical process, right? And he's trying to figure out how this goes. And he's repeating it, and you could read it. He's repeating what this is. And he goes, and saying these things, I went to sleep. And then I awoke in this dream. And I was at the foot of the 7 steps, and there's a bowl and a priest. And I looked in, isn't that just like what's going on in the flask? Right? And then he wakes up and he's like, oh, yeah, that's right. And then he goes back again, right? And then the dream continues. But this is the thing with these texts, is they'll point out these practices, but as throwaways. Most folks get like lost in the description of the copper man devouring himself in there, and what is that? And you should, that's important. But it's these other things in between. So dream work like that. And so for myself, yeah, I mean, it happens. It happens spontaneously, and it happens through like an intent. The funnier ones are when it happens sort of unintentionally, where all of a sudden, and I'll give you an example of like, of a dream I had, and then how this starts to point into two directions, right? I was saying this in the earlier talk, that there are dreams you have that you could bring into the world and actually is an answer to a very specific problem, right? And then there are ones that start to indicate ways deeper in, right? Into a conscious, into whatever, making the unconscious conscious, I don't know. I'm still working it out. I'm waiting to get through the next door. So I have this dream. I'm working in my laboratory, right? Because I do not so much now, but before COVID and things, a little bit more. So I was working in my lab and in the dream, and it was much nicer lab that I had, right? But there I am, I'm kind of like working on a problem, and I hear these voices behind me, right? And I like turn around, it's like, what, where is this coming? And it's like a tour, right? And there's a tour guide there, and he's bringing him through, and I'm like, well, this is cool. He goes, yes, and here, and he's pointing to doors, and he's saying, here's the, this is the entry to the Alchemy Museum. And he's giving a little description, and he opens the doors and he says, well, come on in. And so the crowd starts going in, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in on this one. And then I start to go, he stops and turns and goes, not you. You should take that door. And I'm like, sure thing, pal. Tour guide, yeah, I know who you are, right? So I open the door, and it's like a diorama. Like anybody ever been to the Natural Museum in New York City? It was like a room like this. I'm thinking, wow, this is really, except every window is filthy, right? And I'm like, okay, what is this? It's like I think I see something in there.
Polishing the mirror.
Yeah, and then it goes on, and it just gets very specific to me. And You know, it's like, oh, then Karl Malden showed as Santa Claus and Stalin was writing with him. You know what I mean? It's like that level of absurdity and
Yeah.
specificity. So I'll stop there. But my point is that you start with what remained lucid, and there were, for me, like indications once I got into that next room, pointing deeper, right? Into, it's not like a practice outside or anything like that. There was one more that's actually kind of funny. I had this lucid dream, and it's like, as you will, if you do this, it's a very, in Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, it's a practice, right? To kind of awaken that kind of level of, and then they give exercises. The interesting thing is actually, if you read the Corpus Hermeticum, they speak of the same thing, right? Imagine yourself this, imagine yourself that, right? This is what you do in the Dreamwork. So anyway, I'm having this, I forget which, I'm sorry, I'm not even know if I should say this. This is kind of like funny because you know how that goes. I'm trying to think which one, never mind. I'm going to stop here. I'll come back to it. I just have to, okay, here it is. I'm sorry. It just, sometimes when you hesitate, you kind of go, I'm having this dream. It's really beautiful, right? I'm flying. It's one of these things, right? And I'm flying with, say, a very attractive individual. And so we decide, oh, here's a really lovely, grassy, sunny day. Let's go have sex, right? So we kind of fly on down. You know, we start kind of, and then I notice there's a well. Okay. And I think, you know, this is a lucid dream. I'll be right back. Right. So I go over to the well and I go, I want to see something. I want to see hell. I'm going to look into here. This is, and really, I could feel like this kind of a thing. So I lean over and I look down and I don't see anything. It's just sort of like this white, milky, whatever, and I'm feeling it. And then I realize my eyes are open and I'm looking at my ceiling in my bedroom. And I'm like, oh yeah, show me hell. You know, it's like,
yeah.
oh, Faustus, what makes you think what makes you think I have left hell? Right.
Yeah.
And,
Wow.
but I mean, it's these kinds of things that start to come up that,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, this is how it goes, you know.
Yeah. You mentioned you know, some various exercises, and I know in some of your writing there's things that you bring forward. Is there some direction you could point folks to learn more
The
about working
simplest
with the
thing is,
dream?
yeah, remember your dreams. I mean, I
Remember.
don't mean that flippantly. It's just because lucid dreams, these kinds of things, they're spontaneous. They happen all the time. It's just we don't remember our dreams.
Yeah.
So the recommendations in almost all of them is start keeping a journal to remember your dreams.
Yeah.
Then what you start to do is, once you get into a decent habit and you remember it, but you could even start beforehand, is as you're falling asleep, set the intent, right? Just, I'm going to, when I have a dream, I'm going to recognize I'm dreaming and I will awaken the dream, this kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And you actually kind of repeat that during the daytime when strange things happen. Is this a dream or is this real? Because again, those phrases start to show up, right? You start to recognize, like when you are dreaming and it's pre-lucid. I mean, sometimes some of the triggers for lucid dreaming spontaneous are nightmares, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've had one once where it's like, there's no way this can be happening. There's this like sun, no way. And then all of a sudden it's like the lights come on and you go, oh yeah, this is and then I start taking actions to kind of do it. Then you go, this better be a dream.
Yeah.
Right? It's like before I leap over that volcano. But it's this kind of thing. You set the intent, you repeat the intent. If it doesn't happen in the morning, you like review it. You don't go, oh, bad me, I can't do anything. I'm a loser. I'll never be able to get it. It takes time with intent and just repetition. This is the alchemy of it, is the sort of repetition, it's the circulate. And after a point, you will have one, right? We do it. and we do it
Yeah.
naturally. It's usually starts out with flying dreams, you know, that all of a sudden you'll be flying and you realize, how is this happening? And you know, this kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
then once that happens, once you recognize that you're in a lucid dream, if you have a spiritual practice, any kind of practice, carpentry, whatever, you know, bring it into it, work with it. If you're contemplating a line, an image, a symbol, I mean, anything. I mean, it's where your mind's putting things together in a very interesting, concrete way. It's where
Yeah.
anything is possible, right?
Yeah.
Oh, it's yeah.
Yeah.
One of the
Courtney.
first Western works on lucid dreaming, and I'll stop here, was, I forget the guy's name. He was a count in like, 18 something in France. And he was beside himself because he couldn't have sex with all the women he wanted to at court and around because of, as he put it, like propriety and propinquity. His desires led him to awaken in dreams, and so he could do what he wished with anyone. And so he wrote this book about lucid dreaming, about how you can, and it's like, well, all right, you got to do what you got to do, I guess. You know, some of us use it for something, some of us use it for others, I guess. You know, but
Yeah. Yeah.
the high and the low.
Yeah. Well, Courtney, I'm curious about the mythological work you've been studying, you know, the history of bees in myth, because that seems like there's a boundary crossing here of, you know, what is dream world, what is archetype, and how do we learn from that? Are there things that you've learned from your study in the bee mythology that is kind of helping inform your spiritual practice with them, as like alchemical symbolism and things like that?
Yeah, so I feel like I touched on it a little bit, but maybe not fully. But there's this common thread in cultures, ancient cultures around the world, and myths as the bees being these messengers between the worlds,
Yeah.
right? And so the ancient Egyptians saw this. They saw souls flying as like insects or bees. The Greeks, very similar. They would see bees emerging from cracks as souls emerging from the underworld, and the bees being known as a psychopomp in Greek.
Yeah.
So this is an animal said to guide souls to the place of the afterlife. And this was very similar in the Celtic tradition as well. And this kind of bees being also the symbol of like death and rebirth, right? So one of my favorite myths comes from Neolithic Egypt, where bees were born from the dead carcass of a bull. And so that holds symbolism when we think of the bull being the astrological animal for the sign of Taurus, right? And so Taurus season is like bee season. Right. So it's like the bees literally emerging from the darkness, the death, the decay to create life, to create beauty. And so, yeah, bees kind of being seen, like we see bees as being really associated with like life and beauty and creation, but there's been so many rites and rituals and myths around bees being also associated with death and darkness, right? And one of my favorite traditions that I have practiced, for years, comes from medieval Europe, and it's called telling the bees. And I believe that this tradition is rooted in myths around the world that saw bees as these messengers between the worlds, and these beings that were able to guide souls to the afterlife. But it was customary in medieval Europe, and this tradition got brought to the Americas as well, where families who tended bees, if you had a birth or a death in the family, it was customary to go tell the bees. If you didn't tell the bees, it was bad luck. And Rudolf Steiner even saw in the flight of a swarm the departing of a human soul. He talked about. But there's been something that's shown up for me when I experience the death of a loved one, or I'm moving through that. I go and I tell the bees, whether there's a birth or a death in my family, or even any big news. And just kind of them just knowing that they can carry that to where it needs to go. And I think the bees being very liminal beings. So I've talked about that a lot, but like even so the Melissa, which was cool, Brian, when you were talking about the dream incubation, that sparks, just because the Melissae were doing that. They
Yeah.
were the priestesses in those temples, and they were known as bee women. And so this, and when we look at the hive, the darkness, the hum itself, like alters our
yeah.
lives
I
and
was going
brings
to say something about that.
it brings us into an altered state of consciousness. And so
Totally.
this would be happening to me when I first started to tend to bees. I didn't know what was happening, but I would be working with the hive, and I would think I was there for like 20 to 30 minutes, and I'd come to the house. My mom was like, "What were you doing up there?" And I was out there for hours, but time literally stopped. And I felt like I got brought into this very liminal space. And I think that happens not only because of the hum and the vibration of the hive. And when we look at just like drumming and sound and how that's, humans have used that to access altered states of consciousness for thousands of years, that the hum of the hive brings us into this very liminal altered state. But also, the symbol that the sister dances, the worker bee dances when she finds forage, is it's the lemniscate pilatus, which is the symbol of infinity itself, which is the void. And so working with that symbol and understanding it, but I don't fully remember what the question was, but
I don't think there was a question.
Yeah, just like, let's just go for it. But
what are your thoughts? I think it's more like it, and this is fabulous.
But in terms of the mythology is like the bees as being these very liminal beings, and associated with symbols of death and rebirth. And for me, that custom of telling the hive, of understanding, that the hive can carry messages to where they need to go, and guide souls to where they need to go, has influenced a lot of, it's just like, it's a simple practice that I do when I work with the bees, is to tell them of things. I tell them of world events going on, when things are like happening in the world, I'm like, hey, I talk to them. And I think
do you use words? I often communicate with my pets just by mental imagery. So like, I'm leaving, I'll tell my cat I'm going to be gone for a few days, and I give him the picture that of me walking through the door and then coming back later. And I didn't used to do that. And he would come back and he would turn his back on me for like 6 hours. When I do that, he welcomes me back immediately. So like, it's like, there's different ways of communicating. Yeah.
You gotta let them know.
But the words seem to work well with the bees.
Bird, song, drumming.
Yeah. Beautiful. This cross-species communication.
Can I add something to this with the bees? Because there's a couple of things that I think the idea of the humming and the droning, this shows up in the Neoplatonic literature as one of these methods for making this transition. It's often also associated with Hecate, who's a lunar goddess, right? But when you read the literature, you'll constantly hear this idea of drone and rushing sounds. And within a lot of it, bees are referenced. Also cicadas, other things that make this kind of, I know exactly what you're talking. I think anybody who's been to raves knows what you're talking about too, in terms of drone and stuff. But this is one of the reasons I feel it is chosen for this as this liminal creature. The other part I want to mention is that the image of bees coming from bulls comes from an actual practice of reviving a hive when it's gone. And the method is, it's in Virgil. He writes about this in one of his poems, one of his kind of like farming poems, how you do things. What you do is, and I have actually some early recipes on alchemical processes for artificial life. So if anyone's interested, there's a small zine I did on the homunculus, which is on artificial life. So what you do with this is you find a young bull. Sadly, you beat it to death. You sew up its nostrils, basically any orifice. You put him in a ditch for a couple of weeks. As he decomposes, bees emerge. Okay? This is how you get your hive back. Now, the thing is that if you did that, you don't get bees. You get wasps. You get a wasp that has the almost identical appearance as bees. So this idea, I remember as a kid seeing jars of honey And there was always a bull there with bees flying around. And you stare at something long enough and you go, wait a minute, what's the bull got to do with it? This is the origin. So now here's the thing. You could work it backwards, right? You could take these things and create a bull. You need a bull to start with. Anyhow, humans are really twisty when it comes around to animals.
Yeah.
All I have to
Well,
but this is part of it.
yeah.
Virgil.
Animals and humans.
Yeah.
Well, so there's a few sort of popcorn style questions in the Q&A, if you will.
Okay.
The first is, you had mentioned a film, Brian, I think Babette, something or
Oh,
other.
Babette's Feast, yes.
Yeah. Babette's Feast.
Yes, it's a film called, Babette's Feast. It's a narrative, it's a fiction film. I forget who stars in it, it doesn't really matter. It's wonderful, but when I think of alchemy, right, as this thing of, okay, let me just break really simply down, right? You take something, you break it apart, you bring it back together, and in bringing it back together, you've transformed it into its best self, right? Brought it to its completion, right? So, and then you want to have an impact. You want to cause a change for the better in the world around you. Okay, so this is what the movie's about. So thumbnail sketch is, I don't know when it takes place, probably 1880s. It's like the Paris Commune has failed. It's somewhere up in Finland in some really dank fishing village. And this unbelievable Parisian woman shows up, escaping from, France, whatever, and she's this amazing chef. So she's put to task to kind of help feed the poor village people. Anyway, she comes into a fortune. She throws this dinner. Everybody in the village hates each other. She creates this meal where they all sit down and they all decide we're all going to hate it because we don't want to give her the satisfaction. But it is the most fucking amazing meal. And as it unfolds, everybody's like in love by the time it's over. And to me, it's exactly it, right? You've taken the stuff that's around you you've brought it to its best, you've turned around and you've opened all the hearts of these people. It's actually a very funny movie too, but every time when I saw that, it was like, oh my God, best alchemical movie I've ever seen. Wizard of Oz too, but another level.
Yeah, I've heard that story as the stone soup story.
Yeah.
People all contribute to the stone.
And all of a sudden it's like, wow, how'd that happen?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for referencing that again. There's some folks asking about some specific bee questions, Courtney. This one is specifically with regards to royal jelly and the ethical nature of using that as a product. Do you have anything to say there?
Yeah, so I would say in general, for me and my bee tending, I really only work with pollen, wax, propolis, and honey. And in terms of like, those are the medicines that I feel like kind of just come with being a beekeeper, if that makes sense. When it comes to venom, I only work with venom when the bees give me venom. I let them decide. Yeah.
Well put.
And sometimes I'll ask for that medicine, but I think that, so royal jelly is, for folks that don't know what it is, this is the substance. It's kind of like bee milk. Like if I were to like equate it, so like if you can understand, but the sisters or the workers, they have these sebaceous glands in their forehead and they secrete the royal jelly. So royal jelly is this like creamy, milky substance, and it's incredibly like nutrient dense, like really wild chemical composition, I would say. And this is what makes a queen bee a queen bee. So they will take a larvae. So a queen and a worker or sister, they start out as the same larvae. And if the hive wants that larvae to be a queen, they'll feed it solely on a diet of royal jelly for a certain amount of time. And that, queens can live years, right? And the royal jelly is also like the substance that gives her fertility too, and it allows her to like reproduce. When you think of the difference between a sister and a queen, it's like the royal jelly is like this, it gives her fertility, right?
Yeah.
Queen's ambrosia. Like it's yeah, it's a very powerful substance. And with that, I don't personally agree with like consumption of it, especially on a large scale, because that's basically made through like you have to like raise queen cells and harvest swarm cells and kill queens. I have heard of, you know, folks putting like imitator queen cells in the hive and the bees filling that, or, you know, collecting swarm cells in the abundance, you know, abundance of swarm season when there's like a lot of extra. I think I'm interested in the use of royal jelly in ritual and magic, in very, very small doses, or small amounts, but I don't really agree with like human consumption of it. And I don't advocate for it as a supplement or like used in any sort of larger scale industry, because there's just no way for it to be harvested on a large scale sustainably, in my opinion. And I think this is coming back to what I talked about. We really need to reframe our understanding of these medicines as the very, very powerful substances that they are. Not only, you know, in terms of the medicine that they are, but like the role that they have within the hive. And like,
Right.
if we're like putting we're like harvesting too many swarm cells, or we're putting imitator cells in, like how it's just like, I'm really against manipulating the hive. Right. And the more manipulations you put into the hive, the more like rocks you throw in the river, right? You know, in terms of the bees and their expression of their fullness and their vitality. And so the more we manipulate it, the more we just kind of stop this expression. And so, yeah, I don't really agree with human consumption of royal jelly. Although I have worked with it in ritual in small amounts, and it's really, really crazy powerful stuff. And the first beekeeper I actually studied with, he was an apitherapist, and he worked with royal jelly a lot. And I ended up consuming a lot of royal jelly when I was like 18, 19. I don't know if that had anything to do with my journey, but yeah, really powerful stuff. And when I would take small amounts, it was just like, whoa. It's a very powerful substance that I don't think should be used as a supplement
Yeah.
at all.
Thank you for that picture. Because it does seem like it would be powerful just by nature of its role and what it does. So let's revere it as the sacred substance it is. And like you say, use it in ritual. Well, you know, that seems appropriate. Can I connect with these beings? Yeah. Someone's asking if you've heard of the bumblebee breath, you know, the pranayama called Brahmari breath.
Yeah, Brahmari,
Brahmari.
Pranayama. So yeah, I've actually practiced it for years. And in the tradition I've been studying with the Melissa, we do a lot of humming work. We make the sounds of the hive in order to enter into liminal spaces and altered states. But Brahmari is really cool. Just like little story about that. So Brahmari is the Hindu bee goddess, and she is said to reside in the heart chakra, where she emits the sound of thousands of buzzing bees. So Anahat is the heart chakra. It translates to the unstruck sound. And in Vedic texts, they associated bees with being the celestial hum of creation. And Brahmari, she's the Hindu bee goddess. She resides in the heart chakra. She also, in myth, she shapeshifts into swarms of bees to protect the people from these demons that are like coming down. And I love that myth. It's just another myth, because it reminds me of the Melissa being called these bee women, this idea of people shape-shifting into animals, right? This is a very shamanic understanding and thing that, you know, exists cross-culturally. But this idea of, yeah, women shape-shifting into swarms of bees is really powerful and shows up around the world. But yeah, so Brahmari Pranayama is just, it's called humming bee breath. And you basically just hum. And this is a practice that I do personally to ground myself, to ground my nervous system. It's also one of the things I do before I work with my hives. Is I'll sit and do Brahmari. I do it on my womb, my heart, and my third eye. I'll just like hum a few breaths in each of those places. And it helps me to enter into a state to be more present with my bees. So it's a really simple, beautiful pranayama practice to work with, for sure.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Is there a pitch you follow? Is there a particular pitch
It's
of
just
the hum?
like you
Or do you
close
just
your
kind of
mouth.
feel?
Yeah, it's just like so literally just like you're just kind of humming and like feeling that vibration, particularly in the throat. But it's just like a deep hum.
Okay. No, I was just wondering if, you know, because there are some people who work with tones associated with chakra. And I was just like wondering with this humming,
Yeah.
particularly coming out of certain traditions, if they had a thing, it's like, well, no, this one is a higher, this one is a lower. This is very interesting. No,
Yeah.
really, on yeah, I'm working on an audio constructed piece that works with the drones associated with Hecate. And so the fact that
Cool.
there's a group of folks that kind of work with humming around bees, it's like, excuse me, what were you saying?
It would be interesting to see. I'm sure hives have frequencies, you
Well,
know.
that's what I'm wondering. Is there
Yeah.
a consistency?
Yeah, I don't know, like it's like there and it's like not coming.
No, well, I think
My brain right now.
I think what Ben's even asking is, does each hive, a natural hive, have its own particular pitch, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, in terms of a hum,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
mean,
then is that
I think it's
consistent, like,
temperature dependent too.
right? Because
uh,
cats, I've heard, all purr at the same pitch. Right? That's like, all right, think about that one. Is that the universal ohm? Right?
Right.
No, but you can see how perhaps I think it's a really interesting idea. I mean,
totally.
do they have? And then if you harmonized yourself with them, do you hum? I mean, with them? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like, each hive has its own like energetic signature
yeah,
too.
that's
That's associated to me primarily with the queen,
mhm.
her pheromone, right? And so that kind of holds the hive together in certain ways. I would say that like the hum of bees is like synonymous or like very, the
Uh-huh.
same. But within that, if there's like different variations within whether a hive is at peace or whether a hive is agitated.
Gotcha.
Right.
Of course,
But
yeah.
so much of bee tending
Mood.
is being a really good listener and
Uh-huh.
listening to the hum of the hive. And so when I'm working with the hive and it's at like a steady,
Yeah, like you're
they're
good.
happy. But they get into their venom dance, and their venom song will go
Yeah.
zzz.
And you got like 10 seconds to move.
Totally. And so you'll start to like tune in to the hum of
Yeah,
the hive as
beautiful.
you're tending to them. And when it starts to escalate, you're crossing a boundary and they're letting you know.
Wow.
And so I think like the hum of bees is like the hum of bees,
Yeah,
right? And but within that, it's based on like conditions and environment and what they're
sure.
currently experiencing. And I see the hum of the hive mostly shift if they're being agitated, or like it'll go from that like very peaceful hum to like, oh, like we're getting a little bit higher
Yeah.
and more
Yeah,
defense.
you get a little tense here.
Yeah,
Pitch is rising. Okay.
it's
Yeah.
just rising. Venom
Yeah.
song.
I love it. I love that term. Is that something that's it's called, or is that something you call it? Have you coined
Um,
this? I
I
love
had a
it.
I had a mentor call it that, but I went through a whole series of like working with venom and
Yeah.
just like,
Yeah.
initiation and the medicine that venom is for me and what it to me represents is just
Hmm.
like it's boundaries, right? It's protection.
Sure.
It's like I see venom as showing up particularly as like the divine feminine also, and like, you know, yeah, and just like protection of that which is most sacred,
Sure.
and so like how venom shows up for me is like how I express boundaries, how I protect.
Hmm.
And but yeah, listening, the venom song is very it's you know it.
You know it. I would
You know
imagine you learned that one fast.
Yeah.
it.
But
It's
it's
like sometimes you're
interesting.
not in the mood to collect venom, I'm good.
Yeah,
So
right. No contributions today. But
no
it's
contribution
interesting you
today.
speak about that because that really is like that's the plant's gesture too. Phoenix was talking yesterday about the toxin element and that when we work with those toxins, like they are the plant's defense system. And so it
Yeah.
makes sense that there's that correlate there. But then there is a healing in that where we can start to understand its action and its dosage. And there can
Mhm.
be a
Poison
relationship
and
where,
Exactly.
yeah,
poison
That's
is
those.
medicine. It's so powerful, and venom is like such powerful medicine. And just like Paracelsus says, the difference between medicine and poison is dosage.
Yeah.
yeah, I think that was the quote he
Um,
used.
I'm
Yeah.
like fascinated with poisonous plants. Like personally, I have a really
Oh
strong
yeah.
connection to them. And I love them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I get it.
Very obsessed. Um, but they've been really powerful allies for me, and venom has been a really powerful ally for me. When I receive venom, it's like it's powerful medicine, and but it is, and like bee venom therapy is so powerful. Like bee venom has been shown to directly target cancer cells. It's been shown to directly kill the HIV virus. It's one of the only cures for Lyme's disease. It works really well for like really intense musculoskeletal inflammation. But like with that, the way that I see bee venom therapy being practiced in the United States is not ethical, right? It's people order a package of bees online, it gets shipped to their house, and then they steam themselves. I really
yeah,
believe
no.
that. I really believe that if you're going to work with venom, that needs to be a ritual and a sacrament, because you are working with the venom of an animal, which is powerful, right? And the bee, she gives her life for that.
Exactly.
So to not do that in a sacred container feels really dangerous to me in a spiritual sense. And so, yeah, I love, like, venom medicine is incredibly powerful, but I believe in letting the bees decide when to give it.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. Great. Well, we're just wrapping up here a little bit. There's one more question for you, Brian. You've mentioned the Neoplatonic texts a few times. Are there any specific ones that you would recommend people look up?
In general, what I would highly recommend is an overview of this that does look at that parallel, or how it comes out of, in other words, the Byzantine philosophies coming out of but talks about the Neoplatonic, is a work by Gregory Shaw called Theurgy and the Soul. And he was one of the first scholars, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 years ago, that was doing work on Dionysus, but was familiar with the other stuff. And he goes, whoa, wait a minute. What are you substituting words for here, pal? But goes, it's brilliant. And you really get a sense of the philosophy that underlies the Byzantine, sort of the works of art and how they're used in practice. Doesn't so much touch on like sort of the alchemical aspect of things, but you understand it coming to that, right? With how the philosophies are there. Iamblichus is the one that is probably the most. Neoplatonism, in my mind, kind of feels like Buddhism, right? Where you have a Mahayana Buddhist kind of, which is like full of images, visualization practices, things like this. And then you have a Zen Buddhism, right? Which has like, just sit, right? And Neoplatonism, in my mind, has a similar thing. Plotinus wrote I forget how many books of 9 chapters. I think it's 6 books of 9 chapters. I always screw this up. Plotinus is called the Enneads. It's a major work on it, but this is kind of more of, well, here's a quote from it, for instance, right? He's talking about how to move beyond sort of like your physical representations and this and that, right? And so there's a question as if it's posed, and he goes, well, then, he's asked, well, then how do you do this? He goes, cut everything away, right? This is what I mean. There's like there's a very Zen Buddhist kind of a thing, not this, just keep cutting, just keep cutting. And you find this in the philosophies, right? You'll find this in the Neoplatonic. So Plotinus, and then more to like, say, the magical traditions, the sort of, spiritual theurgic is Iamblichus on the mysteries, right? This is available. This is very readable because it's actually a polemic. He's arguing against another Neoplatonic individual who's saying, no, we don't necessarily need representations.
How do you spell that?
Iamblichus is like, yeah, it's spelled IAMBLICHUS. I feel like I'm in some kind of spelling bee. Iamblichus. I know if I didn't say it ended at the end, I would have lost. I know that. I was the substitute in my 5th grade spelling bee. It was like if the person fell down, I was to go forward.
Nice.
So there,
you nailed it.
On the mysteries. It's now available in paperback. And what's good about it, it is a critical edition. So you will get the Greek on one side, not that I read it or you read it, whatever. I feel it keeps them honest, right?
Yeah.
Because you can look it up and the notes are fabulous. And what his argument is that no, divinity isn't separate from us, it's around us. And
Right.
because as he points out, the gods used to walk amongst us, right?
Yeah.
You could go down the street and Hermes would start screwing with you, right? This type of thing. You go, so what happened? No, the gods are still around, right? They're
Yeah.
here. And
Yeah.
we can do this. And he goes through these processes of what you do. So I would start with Gregory Shaw, really, because it's very accessible, talks about it, but then also links it to the Byzantine, and you'll start to see. And then I would get the Iamblichus as well, and I would start there.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you.
May I give one hint on reading this material?
Yeah.
Okay. Just read the words. If you don't get it, just keep going. If it really starts to make your mind numb, turn the pages, skim it, wait till you find something that hooks your eye, back up a paragraph or two, start there and continue until you get like shitless when you hit the stuff. Because there's like really weird, deep logic, philosophy that is like, oh, but around this, built upon this, it's astounding. I mean, when they say behold or consider this, I mean, really, practice lucid dream, bring this in. It will change your view of philosophy. You go, wow, if they taught this when I was in high school or
Right.
college as philosophy, wow.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you both. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. It's been really wonderful to have you both.
It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. Have a good one.
Awesome. All right.